at the start of Acts 12 that Herod had put James, the brother of John, to death by the sword. Apparently, it was a popular move on Herod's part, and now, to curry more favor from his subjects, he arrested Peter and was going to put him to death as well. Now, the question often arises, why did God allow James to die and yet miraculously save Peter? Perhaps in James's case, James had already fulfilled his purpose in God's plan, while Peter still had more work to do. Life is full of difficult questions like this. Why is one child physically disabled and another child athletically gifted? Why do people die young before ever seemingly realizing their potential? Questions like these cannot possibly be answered in this life because we don't see all that God sees. We know that God has chosen to allow evil in this world for a short time, but we can trust God's leading because he has promised to destroy all evil eventually. In the meantime, we know that God will help us to use our suffering to strengthen us and to glorify his name. Paul says in Romans 5:4, we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. And this hope will not disappoint us. James, the brother of Jesus, also addresses this issue when he says, consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. Verse 5 in Acts tells us that Peter was in prison, and while there, the church was praying earnestly for him. The night before Herod intended to bring him out for trial, sentencing, and execution, Peter was sleeping soundly. He must have totally committed his case to the Lord, even though he expected to face execution the very next day. He could still sleep peacefully. Let's stop and think about this for a moment. How many times in our lives are we faced with a problem? It could be a problem on the job, or a relationship problem, a pending eviction or foreclosure, or a sickness in the family. And we will toss and turn all night because of it. And here's Peter about to be executed, and he's sleeping like a baby. I love it. He had Christ inside of him. Like Paul wrote in Philippians 1:21, for to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Paul goes on to say that he would prefer to die and be with Christ. And I'm sure Peter, who had walked and lived with Jesus, felt this even more so. An angel appeared in Peter's jail cell. The angel proceeded to just walk him right out of the prison, right out the gate, and down the road. Peter thought that this was a vision or a dream. It wasn't until the angel left that he came to his senses and he realized it was real. After this, he went to Mary's house, the mother of John, also called Mark. This is probably the very same place where the Last Supper was held, and also the same upper room where Jesus appeared to his disciples after his resurrection. Peter knocked on the door while they were all still praying, and no one would believe it was truly him. If they didn't believe it was him, what were they praying for? The prayers of the group of believers were answered even while they were still praying. But when the answer arrived at the door, they didn't believe. We should be people of faith who believe that God answers the prayers of those who seek his will. When you pray, believe you will get an answer. And when that answer comes, don't be surprised. Be thankful. I have to stop a minute and say that any pastor or teacher can stand up and encourage you to have faith that your prayers will be answered. But the reality is that sometimes we sometimes face the same doubts and fears that everyone else faces. In this segment of Acts 12, I keep being drawn back to the first chapter of James. James 1, 5 through 8 says that if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That man should not think he will receive anything from the Lord. He is like a double-minded man, unstable in all he does. Now, for me, this is a very humbling verse, because like those who are praying for Peter, I sometimes have the lack of faith to believe that my prayers will truly be answered, and that's not a place where I want to be. So join me in continuing to ask the Father for an increase of faith, because without faith, it is impossible to please God. Now, the King Herod of Acts 12 is Herod Agrippa I. He is the third Herod mentioned in the New Testament. Herod the Great, the ruler at the time of Christ's birth, was this Herod's grandfather. Herod Antipas, who murdered John the Baptist and was involved in trying Jesus, was the uncle of Herod Agrippa I. Now, Herod Agrippa had endeared himself to the Jewish people because of his piety. Herod knew the law and the commandments, and he made a big show of obeying all of them. So his disobedience to those laws was a particularly serious matter. The events recorded in Acts 12, 19 through 23 are also recorded by the Jewish historian Josephus. And I'm paraphrasing his writings from his writings, Antiquities of the Jews. And I quote, paraphrasing, "On the second day of the festival held in Caesarea in honor of Claudius, Agrippa donned a silver garment of wonderful texture and entered the amphitheater early in the morning. And when the sun's rays shone on his garment, the brilliant glare caused his flatterers to cry out that he was a god. Josephus added that the king neither rebuked them nor rejected their impious flattery. And almost immediately, a severe pain rose in his abdomen, and 5 days later, he died in agony."
You've been dropped like a dream to the floor. You've been told not to try anymore.